One of the biggest phenomenons of the 1980s, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were iconic to the children born in the early to mid-years of that decade. We saw the cartoons, bought the toys, read the comics, and even saw the movies when they came out. But for those who were born later on, they might not know the full story behind the Turtles. Even to those of us who were around in the beginning may not know the complete details. This special comic to cartoon video will discuss everything related to the heroes in a half-shell. What will be commented on relating to the Turtles is the original independent comic, the 1987 cartoon, the 3 movies from the early 1990s, and the 2003 Turtles series. Let's begin with the original comic, printed by Mirage Studios. Some may not know this, but the actual comic itself was quite dark and graphic to a point, much like the entire American comic book industry of the 1980s. The idea was that the 2 creators of the Turtles, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, came up with a crazy random idea based on the most popular mainstream comics of the early 1980s, which were Daredevil, the New Mutants, Cerberus, and Ronin. What's also clearly noticeable is that the original appearance of the Turtles is also different, even from the cartoons and movies, once again referring to the era in which they were introduced in. At the time, it was common for independent comics to be published in only a black and white format, not only to save money, but it was because independents had a low budget and exposure to begin with. But for those who read the original comic like myself, we remember that fact. The comic itself began with simple origins, but as time went on, the Turtles became more popular and things became more complicated within the comics, with the comics going into multiple volumes and the creators eventually selling their stakes within the issues. The continuity of the comics is something of a preference as well, as some fans do not accept normally what has been presented in newer issues of the comic. Examples will be given later on in the narration. On a final bit of commentary about the comics, most refer to the original series as being the core of the Turtles universe, with everything later revolving around it. I would personally suggest reading some, if not all, of the original series. It's a sharp contrast to later depictions of the Turtles. Speaking of the Turtles, let's bring them into the discussion now. Leonardo actually never refers to himself as the leader of the Turtles, although he does take up that position often. Being the oldest, he's also the most experienced of the Turtles in combat. Given a katana, it's a reflection of his personality, cool, calm, and collected, also the most deadly. One of the greatest stories with Leonardo is when he's out for an exercise jumping from rooftop to rooftop when he's ambushed by the elite foot guard. Even with all his experience, Leonardo's beaten to near death and his sword's broken. Later on, the others begin to worry when Leonardo fails to return. At the moment they least expect it, his body is thrown through April O'Neil's apartment window, and then the foot strike. Even with all of the Turtles, Splinter, and Casey Jones, it's not enough. They're forced to retreat. Leonardo's confidence in battle had been seriously shaken, and through trials he overcomes his fear and becomes an even more powerful warrior than before. This story was reimagined in the now classic 2003 TMNT episode The Shredder Strikes Back Part 1 and 2. In the 1987 cartoon, however, he has a calm outlook on things, but as the series progresses he becomes more expressive, almost like Michelangelo. Also in the 1980s cartoon, he's clearly the leader, as mentioned during the cartoon opening theme song. In the 2003 cartoon, he's similar to the comics, but with a more spiritual view. Very close to Splinter, he's the typical prodigal son, taking Master Splinter's teachings extremely seriously. During the series, he's also the one who takes the problems of all the Turtles onto his shoulders. He felt and gave that impression that he has a lot to deal with. My own personal view is that he had a sort of flirting relationship with Karai during the series also. She had more interaction with Leonardo than anyone else, but Leo's a turtle that you can approach easily and talk to, not like Raphael. Raphael is the second most experienced warrior of the group, just behind Leonardo. As a matter of fact, he could be just as skilled as Leonardo, but his temper and anger keep him from doing that. Raphael was the most violent turtle and had a tendency for going berserk in either battle or when he got angry enough. He has a somewhat cynical and sarcastic sense of humor. Raphael is also one who is fiercely protective of his family and friends, often getting into trouble because of that. Much like his personality, Raphael uses the Sai, a particularly dangerous weapon which can also damage the user if they do not have the proper experience. Much like Raphael himself, in earlier incarnations of the character, he did have some problems using his weapons at first, but later grew accustomed to them. Raphael is also closest to Michelangelo, often being more relaxed and carefree around him. This fact was actually mentioned during the original comics, as Raphael commented that the idea of Mikey possibly getting hurt is a reason for his harsh temper. Raphael would also be the first member of the Turtles to have a girlfriend, meeting Ninjara in issue 28 and breaking up near the end of the magazine's 75th issue. In the future, Raphael would lose an eye during a conflict with the Shredder and Verminator X. He would time travel after Donatello invents the technology and eventually retire and become a bar owner. In the 1987 cartoon, the show's theme states that Raphael is cool but rude, as opposed to being angry and withdrawn in his other incarnations, since the series was mostly happy and aimed at children. Raphael is sarcastic and supplies comic relief alongside Michelangelo, with the difference being that due to his ignorance and spaciousness. As a result, Michelangelo is the subject of Raphael's jokes more than any other turtle. He frequently makes jokes that break the fourth wall. Essentially, Raphael is another version of Michelangelo who tells different kinds of jokes in the 1980s cartoon. In the 2003 series, Raphael is portrayed more closely to the original 1980s comic, being angry and distant. He's shown having a conflict with Leonardo and Michelangelo, with Leo due to him being the leader and resenting his own place in the group, and with Mikey due to his carefree attitude towards things. In this cartoon, his best friend seems to be Casey Jones, as when they first meet they were nearly rivals, but later get along. As the series progresses, Raphael begins to understand why Leonardo is the leader and starts to stop questioning Leo's authority. Next is a fan favorite. Kevin Eastman's original Ninja Turtle concept drawing portrayed an unnamed turtle with nunchaku strapped to its arms. Some consider Michelangelo to be the first Ninja Turtle created. The most carefree of the Turtles, Michelangelo represented the 1980s Turtles to many who were part of the generation that remember the series. The original comics, Michelangelo was the least exposed character, but in later depictions of the Turtles, he's a very important one. Often being neutral in terms to Leonardo's leadership, Raphael's anger, and Donatello's logic. Much like his personality, Michelangelo uses the nunchaku, a weapon that's unconventional at first glance, but can be a trusted weapon to get the job done. It's actually known that Michelangelo has the talent to be an extremely skilled warrior. Actually, he can be even more skilled than Leonardo, but Mikey's laid-back attitude means that untapped talent will never truly be realized. But when the situation calls for it, Michelangelo can be serious. In the original comic, he was the light-hearted member of the group, adding a bit of shine to the dark, grim aspect of the series. In terms of popularity, Michelangelo can be argued as the most popular of all the Turtles. When Leonardo was almost killed during an ambush by the Foot Clan, the Turtles, Splinter, April, and Casey Jones retreat to a farmhouse in Massachusetts which used to belong to Casey's grandmother. While there, April noticed that Michelangelo didn't seem to be his usual self. He spent his days in the barn taking out his aggression on a punching bag. A scene shows him lashing out at his surroundings and repeatedly punching the wall of the barn until it breaks, then collapsing on it, his anger spent. The end of the story implies that Michelangelo's sorrow and frustration have been resolved, as subsequent issues restore Michelangelo's more relaxed, optimistic personality. It is during the group's time at the farm we learn that Michelangelo also has an interest in comic books, specifically ones involving superheroes such as the Justice Force, which is a spoof based on the Justice League and Fantastic Four. He also finds comfort in writing fiction and has produced a story depicting himself as a ronin in feudal Japan. In later depictions of the comics, Michelangelo's experience with writing is expanded, and he even writes a successful novel as mentioned by April. It's also interesting to notice that Michelangelo is the only turtle who did not end up being disfigured in some way during the series. Leonardo lost his left hand and had it replaced by a steel cap with a retractable blade. Raphael was facially disfigured after being shot in the face, and Donatello was transformed into a cyborg and thrown out of a helicopter. In the 1987 series, he was most popular with the iconic phrase, "Cowabunga." Even though all the turtles love to eat pizza, Michelangelo is the one above all the others who eats more of it and thinks more about it during the entire series. He also provides most of the jokes during the series, most of which are funny, not sarcastic like Raphael. In the 2003 series, Michelangelo keeps the humor, but it's mostly American pop references at the time. He was also one to talk endlessly with some of the other turtles and even Master Splinter knocking him on the back of the head as a motion to stop talking. He's a bit more serious than the 1987 cartoon counterpart, and is the most down-to-earth in relation for the viewer when looking at all of the turtles. In the original comics, Donatello is presented as calm and collected like Leonardo, but with a scientific outlook instead of the spiritual outlook that Leonardo had. It's stated very early that he's extremely skilled with technology and prefers that to fighting. He's the one that actually prefers to use logic and reason to avoid fighting if possible. This has been mentioned in all incarnations of him to one degree or another. Much like his personality, Donatello is the master of the bow's staff weapon. Deadly at long range, but ineffective in close combat. If there is such a thing as the weakest turtle, then it's Donatello. He's often in the turtle lair working on building technology to help the turtles and their allies against the Shredder and the forces of evil. In the 1987 cartoon, it's Donatello who invents the Turtle Van, Turtle Blimp, and Turtle Com. In this series, he's a genius whose inventions always work, not like the 2003 incarnation. This version of Donatello actually comes up with many of the plans that the turtles use to fight the Shredder and Krang, even though Leonardo is technically the leader of the group. It's also possibly referenced that Donatello has little care for human culture besides the scientific aspects. In the 2003 series, Donatello is once again the smartest turtle, but his inventions don't work all the time. He seems to prefer technology to ninjutsu, but would fight if the situation calls for it. He also seems to be closest to April in this series. Donatello also gets along with all of his brothers, having never any real fights or confrontations with them. He's the one who arguably keeps them together. One example is that during an alternate reality adventure, he actually reunifies the team, because due to circumstances, they all split apart. Let's bring the discussion now to the most important allies of the Turtles. The father figure of the Turtles, Splinter, had a series of interpretations throughout the comics and cartoons as well as the movies. Splinter's origin can be a bit complicated depending on which version is in discussion and which one fans prefer more. In the original comic, 1990s movies, and 2003 cartoon series, Splinter was a rat kept as a pet by Hamato Yoshi. Splinter was an unusually smart rat, often watching his master practice the martial arts and ninjutsu. In these versions, Yoshi became involved in an argument with a fellow ninja, Oroku Nagi, and is eventually killed by his brother, Oroku Saki, also known as the Shredder. After the death of his master, Splinter is forced to flee and eventually makes his way to the sewers of New York City. During an accident above ground, baby turtles are washed into the drain. Splinter comes across them and keeps them, naming them all after European Renaissance artists from a book he had also found in the drains. My favorite origin for Splinter would be the 2003 version, where Master Splinter was the pet of Hamato Yoshi. Splinter comments that Yoshi was an even greater master of the ninja arts than he is, commenting that the Shredder needed Yoshi's help, but refused. Yoshi fought against the Shredder and the Foot Clan. Yoshi defeated many of the Foot, but he was still human and eventually grew tired. Shredder then had Hun attack Yoshi. Splinter, desperate to help his master, only managed to scratch Hun's face. Splinter was easily knocked aside. The Shredder would demand Yoshi help him one more time, as Yoshi would refuse, rather to die with honor than to betray the ninja arts to one so evil as the Shredder. As the Shredder then killed Yoshi, Splinter fell into the sewers and later found the turtles. The 1987 cartoon was different because Splinter was Hamato Yoshi. Yoshi was an instructor for the Foot Clan in Japan who had a passion for European Renaissance art. However, he had constant friction with another instructor, Oroku Saki, who would later become the Shredder. Saki would frame Yoshi for planning to murder the Grand Master of the dojo, and unable to prove his innocence, was forced to flee Japan. Living as a hermit in the sewers of New York City, it's here he found the turtles. Yoshi's only companions were the rats, as this is what he transformed into when he came in contact with the mutagen. The turtles would mutate into what they came in contact with, which was Yoshi. Splinter is seen as the father and teacher figure of the turtles, often giving advice and being the supreme word when it comes to issues in the turtle lair. Much like Splinter, April's origin had been drastically different according to the original comics. Modern comics, 1987 cartoon, 1990s movies, and 2003 cartoon. April's full name is April Harriet O'Neil, and in the original comics she was a scientific assistant of Baxter Stockman. After April discovered what she was doing was not for the benefit of anyone, but for Stockman's own scheme, he tries to kill her by sending robots after her, fleeing into the sewers as a method of escape. She stumbles across the turtles as they save her. April would later own an antiques shop, but that would be destroyed during a battle with the Foot Clan and the Shredder. April would later be haunted by nightmares of the attack. At this point is where the comics begin to diverge and the cartoons and movies don't acknowledge April's character progression from this point on. During the mid-1990s, she becomes romantically intimate with Casey Jones, the two of them even adopting a daughter. In later comics, April is attacked by a robot that's controlled by Baxter Stockman's brain. Revealed further along in the comics, the attack had her become sterile and was killing her from the inside with nanomachines. With the help of an alien race, the threat to April's life is no more, but she's still unable to have children of her own. It gets even more bizarre, as this fact of not being able to have children causes her to become a female vigilante. But the most insane fact of all is that through circumstances, April is not really a person. She's just a living drawing created by Kirby, who's a tribute to the legendary comic book artist Jack Kirby. Apparently, her father was desperate to have a daughter, so her father used Kirby's crystal and drew a daughter for him. But this was before April's father had a real child, April's so-called sister, Robin O'Neil. This proves to be too much for April as she decides to leave Casey and her adopted daughter and sort out her own feelings. When this was put out, there was immediate fan backlash. Not just because April, who was a key character for the Turtles for so long, but because the origin story sounded bad to begin with. No other incarnation of April had this origin, and my personal view is that this will be, or has been, retconned already. In the 1987 cartoon, April O'Neil was the main anchor woman for Channel 6 News, wearing the iconic yellow jumpsuit with white boots. Her best friend being Irma, the receptionist for the channel. Headstrong and not afraid to get into trouble or get her hands dirty, she had an apartment in New York City but was forced to relocate due to the events with the Turtles. Now, this is the origin we all know. April was actually on the lead of a series of robberies related to ninja. Surrounded by a gang of thugs, April ran away and into the sewers. Reaching a dead end, the turtles managed to hear the commotion and came to her rescue. This incident would be slightly modified for the 1990s movie origin of how April met the turtles. April was also the turtles' main link to the outside world, as she would often let them know what was happening above ground. In the cartoon, April had to be rescued by the turtles often. In the Turtles crossover movie, Turtles Forever, the 1987 Donatello mentioned that they saved their incarnation of April at least once every day. In the early 1990 movies, April worked for Channel 3 News, not Channel 6. Doing a report on mysterious thefts, she encountered a band of thugs. The turtles would save her without being seen. She would find Raphael's sai, which had been dropped. He followed her to get it back, later saving her again from Foot Ninja. Knocking her out, he took her back to the turtle lair. When she awoke, she was surprised to see the turtles and Splinter. Much like the original comics, April's shop would be attacked by the Foot Clan. April and Casey Jones later got together during the movie. Being close to the turtles, Michelangelo actually had a crush on her, but later put the relationship as a sister sort of feeling. In the 2003 cartoon, April had more regular attire and was once again the assistant of Baxter Stockman. However, her knowledge of technology was more apparent, meaning she naturally had a better relationship with Donatello. As always, she had a love-hate relationship with Casey Jones. Gongala, Gongala! Casey's real name is Arnold Bernard Jones. Having grown up in a tough neighborhood, he decided to take matters into his own hands by wearing a hockey mask and beating up thugs himself. Known for using baseball and cricket bats, golf clubs, and hockey sticks, he's never been caught by the police despite his insane appearance. He also says Gongala Gongala as a sort of battle cry among other things when going into fights. In the original comics, Raphael comes across Casey Jones beating up some thugs and actually stops Casey from killing them. The two of them fight many times throughout the comics before becoming close friends. After the near death of Leonardo and the destruction of April's antique shop, the group moved to a farmhouse in Massachusetts that Casey's grandmother once owned. At this time, the turtles trust Casey enough to call him a member of the family, and call the farmhouse a second home. Casey later goes to Los Angeles planning to meet up with April, but he later meets and falls in love with a pregnant woman named Gabrielle. She dies later in childbirth, and Casey names the child Shadow and raises her with April. Casey and April later marry and try to start a family of their own with Shadow. In the 1987 cartoon, Casey Jones plays a very minor role, only appearing for a few episodes and never takes off his mask. Neither does he have a relationship with April. In the 2003 series, Casey has a huge role in the series, often butting heads with Raphael, and is just as important to the turtles as April is. Casey Jones' origin in this series is that his father's store was burnt down by Hun and the Purple Dragons for not giving protection money. Casey's father would go to the police for help, and it's hinted that he was killed as a result. Casey would swear revenge on Hun and the Purple Dragons. Casey and April show interest in each other early on in the series, but their opposite personalities mean they don't see eye to eye on certain issues, but they become very close as the series progresses. Miyamoto Usagi was born the only son of a small village's headman. Having two friends as a child, Kenichi, actually be a main rival to Usagi, and Mariko, whom Usagi and Kenichi would fight over. Eventually the three of them would part ways, as they would undergo trials to learn the arts of war. Usagi would later witness a band of ruffians who planned to attack a lone traveler named Katsuichi. Despite being outnumbered, Katsuichi defeated all of them. Keiichi was unimpressed, but Usagi was moved enough to ask Katsuichi to become his teacher and he his student. Katsuichi would refuse, but after persistence from Usagi, he would later agree. Years would pass and Usagi would learn much from Katsuichi, as events brought Usagi to a contest where he was pitted against his former friend Keiichi. The local daimyo, Mifune, would actually be watching. So impressed with Usagi's skill, offered him a spot as a personal retainer of his. Before leaving his village for the final time, Usagi would happen to come upon Keiichi, who was drinking to help calm his misery at losing. The two of them would later save their village from vagabonds as Keiichi decided to stay and protect it. Mariko actually married Keiichi and was at a loss when learning about the leaving of Usagi. However, before leaving, Usagi and Mariko shared an intimate time together, and Mariko later had a son, Jotaro, as Usagi did not learn about this for years to come. Usagi remained in service to Mifune, becoming a loyal and trusted guard to him and his family. However, a rival lord, Hijiki, sent assassins to kill Mifune. His wife and son would be killed and Mifune himself would battle against those responsible. Mifune would swear revenge and wage war against the culprits. However, at the final battle, Mifune himself would be killed, and Usagi would escape with his master's head to avoid the shame of the enemy capturing it and putting it on display. Usagi actually went against the one most responsible for his master's and master's family's deaths. The resulting battle would have a scar on Usagi's head. Burying his master's head in a forest, Usagi later felt as if he had atoned for losing the battle. If not, he would have felt the right to do ritual suicide. As of this time, Usagi had gone revenge against all responsible except for the one who gave him the scar on his forehead. Usagi now earns a life as a ronin, wandering samurai, often having adventures with his friends. Miyamoto Usagi's skill with swords and the ninjutsu is just as good as Leonardo, as Usagi has had crossover adventures with the turtles at times. Now the discussion will go to the enemies of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. In the original comics, Baxter Stockman was an African who was a sociopath who had no dealings with the Shredder. He developed robots with the help of April O'Neil, who later fled after learning the truth of Stockman's intentions. When asked by April as to why he made robots for those intentions, he simply said because it was fun. Later on, Stockman was apprehended by the police and taken into custody. In later comics, Baxter Stockman would later return as a cyborg and battle the Turtles once more, but again he would be defeated. Donatello would secretly keep parts of the Stockman robot for years, as April would be infected by nanobots from the cyborg. April would later be saved, and the threat from Stockman would finally be neutralized. In the 1987 cartoon, Stockman would be of European heritage and was working with the Shredder against the Turtles. But he was less of a madman than in the comics. In the 2003 series, he would be the most similar to the original comics depiction, but working with the Shredder, often being punished by the Shredder by having body parts removed. Stockman would eventually come to hate the Shredder as much as the Turtles. Hun was a key villain of the 2003 series and one of the main henchmen who worked for the Shredder alongside Karai. Hun's full name is Hunter Mason. When he was in his teens, he and some members of the Purple Dragons burnt down Casey Jones's father's store. He was also with the Shredder when he killed Hamato Yoshi. Splinter would try to save his master, only scarring Hun's face. Hun has worked with the Foot Clan but is not loyal to them, only to the Shredder. The distrust of the Foot is seen by his relationship with Karai. Hun would later leave the Shredder's service when he learns that he's a member of the Utrom alien race. Hun considers the Utrom to be just as much freaks as the Turtles. After leaving the service of the Shredder, he turns the Purple Dragon from a minor street gang to a major crime-oriented syndicate. He does not seem to have much faith in the Shredder after he learns of this fact, and later questions Karai when she knew the truth all along. Karai is a Japanese word meaning to describe flavor, essentially spicy or hot. However, Karai can also mean extremely harsh, strict, storm, or severe. Karai never actually made an appearance in the 1987 cartoon, due to the fact that the character was introduced in 1992 after the original series, and would not really fit into the child-friendly cartoon. Karai would be introduced into the comics as one of the leaders of the Foot Clan in Japan, being brought to New York by Leonardo's killing of the Shredder. The New York City faction of the Foot had been in chaos without its leader, the only real problem being the elite Foot, who seems to have the upper hand in regard to the lower levels of the Foot Clan fighting among each other. Karai captures Leonardo and puts the Turtles with an ultimatum: kill the elite soldiers and help Karai take over the Foot Clan. By doing so means that she will call a truce with the Turtles as leader of the Foot Clan. Having no choice, the Turtles accept. As the group head to the location, they find some foot soldiers holding the body of a dead girl. This girl is revealed as Karai's daughter. Devastated, she forces Leonardo to swear to kill all of the elite foot soldiers out of revenge. Through circumstances, Karai and the Turtles come to a confrontation with the elite foot soldiers. Wearing the Shredder's armor, she commands them to commit ritual suicide. Only one obeys, as the others refuse. After a long and hard battle, Karai and the Turtles are victorious. Karai thanks them for their help, but they don't want any of it, only to keep her promise. As Karai promises, as the Foot will never bother them again, and she heads back to Japan. It's later revealed that Karai has been deposed as leader of the Foot in Japan and is presumed dead. In the 2003 cartoon, Karai is a very important character. A variation of her comic book origin was done for her introduction into the cartoon. Karai was one who was near on par in terms of deadly ferocity with the Shredder, as Karai was the Shredder's best student and apprentice. She's also the adopted daughter of the Shredder. When the Shredder himself is finally no more, she takes on the armor and becomes the new Shredder, hence a Lady Shredder. My personal view is that Karai and Leonardo had a sort of flirting relationship, as out of all the Turtles she had most interaction with him. It was a breath of fresh air for the Shredder to have new henchmen such as Hun and Karai. Although the Shredder did have original henchmen, they were nowhere near as deadly or effective as Karai or Hun. Bebop and Rocksteady were originally human, originally members of a gang that worked for the Shredder in the 1987 cartoon. Not really effective henchmen at all, they never really posed a threat to the Turtles and even messed up the Shredder's plans at times. Mostly for comedy relief, Krang was the only real henchman to actually pose a danger to the Turtles. They would make cameo appearances in the 2003 Turtles cartoon. Before the start of the 1987 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, Krang was in command of an army under the leadership of a general, deciding to steal a gigantic futuristic mobile battle fortress, the Technodrome, and would banish its creator to Earth. When Krang himself was banished from Dimension X, Krang was stripped of his body and reduced to a brain-like blob. Krang would encounter the Shredder, and he, along with the Foot Clan, would move into the Technodrome. In exchange for this, Shredder had to build Krang a robotic exosuit, which the Shredder would do. Krang seemed to be the more evil of the two when compared with the Shredder. His ultimate goal was to take over the Earth, since he was there, but for one reason or another never does so. Krang's appearance was inspired by an alien race from the original Turtles comic book, the Utrom. The Utrom would have a prominent member among them, but at the same time, in other incarnations, he would simply be human. It's time for the Dark Lord himself. The Shredder's appearance is mostly the same through all depictions of himself, wearing cloth with armor slightly resembling that of a medieval feudal Japanese lord. The Shredder is the main foe of the Turtles, Splinter, and all who are allied with the Turtles. But as to who and what the Shredder is can vary depending on the interpretation of the character that has been seen over the years. In the original comics, the real name of the Shredder was Oroku Saki, younger brother of Oroku Nagi, an arch-rival of Hamato Yoshi, the mentor and teacher of Splinter, who was in turn the mentor and teacher of the Turtles. Nagi and Yoshi often fought among each other for the love of the Chinese woman Tang Shen, who loved Yoshi. As the feud between them got worse, Yoshi killed Nagi and fled to America with Shen. The younger Saki, the Shredder, later joined the Foot Clan and rose through the ranks in plans to someday avenge his older brother's murder. Oroku Saki would eventually get his revenge and kill both Yoshi and Shen, while the pet mouse of Yoshi escaped and would one day get revenge for the death of his master by raising the Turtles. When the time was right, Splinter challenged Oroku Saki with the Turtles and planned to kill him. The Turtles were able to defeat him, as the Shredder was allowed to commit seppuku, ritual suicide to atone for Hamato Yoshi and Tang Shen's murders. But the Shredder refused and detonated a bomb. But at the last second, Donatello managed to push the Shredder off a rooftop where the battle took place, and the Shredder fell to his death. In the 1987 cartoon, both Oroku Saki and Hamato Yoshi were members of the Foot, but Saki would frame Yoshi for the attempted assassination of the Grand Master of the Foot Clan. Yoshi would be banished to New York and would live in the sewers to avoid the shame. While Saki spent his time taking over the Foot Clan, he would meet with the alien Krang, and the two of them would try to take over the world but be foiled by Yoshi and the Turtles and their allies. In the 2003 series, a number of people claimed the name of the Shredder. In chronological order, the first being the Tengu Shredder, who was a feudal Japanese lord who lived hundreds of years ago. Next would be the Utrom Shredder, the main foe of the series. Chirel is an alien of the Utrom race, who is known as a galactic criminal. Apparently, Chirel is centuries old, as he was on a prison transport ship when it disrupted it and it fell to Earth. In the Senkaku era of Japanese history, he took on the mantle of the Shredder and founded the Foot Clan. In the late 20th century, Chirel finds an abandoned little girl and decides to train her to be his apprentice, Karai. Besides the Utrom race, only Karai knows Chirel's secret that he is the Shredder. While in New York City to establish a front for the Foot Clan, the Utrom Shredder comes across Hamato Yoshi and later kills him. However, his pet rat would escape, and after trying to help his master, would only scar the face of one of the Shredder's henchmen, Han. However, Chirel is later apparently killed by the Turtles, only to return time and time again. Chirel is finally frozen and imprisoned on an asteroid for eternal exile, as Karai would later take control of the Foot Clan her adoptive father created. With all of the characters known, the topic will now move to the 3 movies, all of which were rather good. Most fans who were not exposed to the 1987 cartoon would become fans through this medium. I personally liked it because instead of using computer graphics, which were starting to become the industry standard at this time, it was done with puppets, costumes, and just good acting. I believe that's why the movies still seem to have a strong impact even today, but there have been controversies about this as well. In all honesty, the movies bordered on a B-list budget, which can be seen at times if you know where to look during the film. But there is another problem with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There are no female turtles or love interests for them. Even in the 1987 cartoon, this problem came up. To counter this, various female characters were introduced through comics, video games, and other media, some of which stood out more than others, such as Venus de Milo, her real name being Mei P. Chin, was introduced in the live-action Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation TV series as a 5th mutant turtle. This character would also appear in other media. Her origin had it that she was with the turtle but would be swept away to the local Chinatown, where she would be found by a kung fu master. Her master would name her Mei Pei Chin, and she would train in China. Through events and on her master's deathbed, he would tell her of her true origin. Deciding to come to America through circumstances, Mei would be attacked by Foot Clan soldiers in Central Park in New York City. During the battle, the statue of a woman would have its head knocked off. Raphael, who came along with the other turtles, would call her Venus de Milo as a result of this. Fans are divided on the issue of such a character, a female turtle. I personally think something like this is needed, but this character exactly? I would leave that up for you, the listener and watcher, to decide. Another was Mona Lisa. In the 1987 cartoon, Lisa was a regular college girl who was on a fishing trip with friends and would be kidnapped. Through circumstances, she was forced to help her abductor with research due to her background in physics. But while trying to escape, she would become mutated. After meeting with Raphael, there was even a possible chance of her being his girlfriend. Once they got back to New York City, however, Mona Lisa was never seen again. My personal view is that the writers forgot about her or did not know what to do with the character. There have been other female characters, but these two stuck out in my personal opinion. Let's move on to a comparison between the 1987 cartoon and the 2003 cartoon. Plenty of fans who are old enough to remember the 1987 cartoon have great respect for the 2003 version, as I do also. I personally like the 2003 version better, even though I remember the 1987 version. Why? Both were brilliant and fantastic. I believe why most prefer the 2003 version was because it was more relatable to the original comics, and it was dark at times just like the comics. This was for older and younger viewers alike. While the 1987 version was also enjoyable, it was mostly aimed at young children and had key aspects of the characters, origins, and themes of the TMNT changed. There will be no doubt more comics to be made on the Turtles as well as cartoons to feature them. What has been mentioned has been the iconic characters in portrayals and variations that will most likely appear and reappear in some varied form because of how good the ideas work. Who knows, we might get something new, but that's up for the fans to decide and accept. On a final matter of discussion, there have been aspects of the Turtles that have not been mentioned, such as minor characters that have appeared in the comics or cartoons, or details that might not have been fully explained, as some would perhaps want them to be. This video narration is to give those who are fans of the Turtles who may not have been born when these comics were first printed or cartoons first aired, or even those who may have read the comics and seen the cartoons but forgot some details as time naturally passed, or even by people who want to hear a story about the Turtles. Here's a bit of trivia. When I'm asked about the Turtles by fans who were too young enough to remember the Turtles when the original comics, 1987 cartoon, or early 1990s movies came out, or even born at the time, and there's a lot of them now, I hear 3 questions mostly asked from them. Question number 1. Why did April O'Neil wear that yellow jumpsuit in the 1987 cartoon series? It had a lot to do with the decade. There's a reason why the 1980s was called a fashion disaster. We all wore clothes that we would not dare dream of wearing in public now. In American comic books, the trend was to have lots of pockets. It was dark and gritty. The idea stuck, even for a news reporter from Channel 6 News. Hardly the attire of a journalist then or now. Question number 2. What's the thing with pizza? In the 1987 cartoon series, pizza was a main theme of the series. They always ate it, and never went a day without a slice. Again, it had to do with the time. It also has to do with the origin of the Turtles. When Splinter found the Turtles, they were hungry. Splinter did not know what to do, so he fed them some old pizza he had found. The Turtles ate it all and loved it. Soon they could not get enough of it. As for what kinds of toppings they like, it's anything really. The pizza theme did not really make much of an appearance in the 2003 cartoon. Question number 3. Are the Turtles really brothers? No. When the little boy who got the Turtles as a birthday present accidentally dropped the glass container holding the Turtles into the drain, he had gotten them as a gift from his parents at a pet store. Random turtles were put into the container for him to keep as pets, so they are not related by blood. This is why the Turtles are of different skin colors. They are brothers by spirit, bond, and trust, not by maternal or paternal lines. Question number 4. What is TGRI? As opposed to being labeled TCRI, Techno Cosmic Research Institute in the Mirage comics, the canister in which the ooze is kept is written as TGRI, Techno Global Research Industries, in compliance with the plot. In the first film, the mutagen is shown as having been the substance that mutated Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo, Donatello, and the Splinter from ordinary animals into anamorphic beings. And that's it. Comment. Who's your favorite turtle? Which cartoon series do you prefer? What do you think of the early 1990s movies? What does the future hold for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? I only have 2 words to say to end this video. Turtle power!